Those of you who watched the first video in this series which discussed character change may remember that I claimed that the disappearing chair in the Colorado lounge was a modified quotation of a continuity error from John Frankenheimer's film Seconds. I also stated then that there was a second such example. Now it's time to expose it. It concerns the cigarette in Ullman's ashtray, which, in 1 minute during the interview sequence, can be seen to disappear and reappear despite the fact that no one is smoking in the scene. The only other object which appears to move on the desk is the pen close to Ullman's left cuff, which might feasibly be being brushed by him. It does not, however, disappear. Interestingly, the only person who does have a cigarette lit and on the go during the interview is Wendy Torrance. She is in the flat in Boulder reading The Catcher in the Rye. Considering the conclusion of the video on psychology in The Shining, it does make you wonder whether there's a relationship between her ashtray and the one in Ullman's office. It was only when watching critically acclaimed films with psychiatric themes that the probable source for this continuity error leapt out. Be advised though, while I'm convinced of its relevance, Kubrick made his version of it way more subtle. The film in question is called The Three Faces of Eve and was directed by Nunnally Johnson in 1957. It starred Joanne Woodward as the eponymous Eve, and she won the Academy Award for her performance. It was based on the real case of Christine Costner Sizemore, who in 1953 was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. Early in the film, as a result of a couple of incidents at home, Eve White is taken to see a psychiatrist called Dr. Luther, played by Lee J. Cobb. There follows a lengthy interview in his office. Let's look at the changes in a series of shots which start about 16 minutes into the film and last about 2 minutes 40 seconds. Similarly to Ullman's office, you need to focus on the ashtray, but also on the cigar Dr. Luther is smoking. At the 16-minute point, we can clearly see that Luther's large ashtray is on the desk blotter. It's empty, but he has a cigar in his hand as he talks with Eve White. 17 seconds later, there is a cut. His hand is out of sight, but for some reason the ashtray has moved to the wooden part of the desk and now contains a cigar. 13 seconds later, there is another cut. The cigar remains in the ashtray, which in turn remains on the wooden part of the desk. Again, there is no view of Luther's hand. That changes at 16:52, when another cut reveals a cigar in his hand as well as one in the ashtray. The cut, which happens 6 seconds later, maintains that situation. The ashtray is still on the wooden part of the desk and contains a cigar. Luther still has one in his hand. There follows a period of just over a minute, during which time Eve White's alter ego, Eve Black, appears. By now, the empty ashtray is back on the blotter, and Luther is relighting a cigar. At 18 minutes and 24 seconds, we see Eve Black throw her hat onto the table. Luther is still lighting his cigar, and the empty ashtray is on the blotter in front of him. 3 seconds later, there is a cut back. The hat conceals the ashtray this time, but at least the cigar is still being relit. The next cut follows almost immediately. Luther still has a match in hand, relighting the cigar, but the empty ashtray has moved back to the wooden part of the desk, and the hat is no longer visible. 11 seconds after that, the situation is almost the same, except that the ashtray now has a cigar in it, as Luther is simultaneously lighting another. So is this egregious set of continuity errors in The Three Faces of Eve the source of Kubrick's very subtle continuity anomaly in The Shining? And if this is analogous to the disappearing chair, which I associated with Jack's character change into Eugene O'Neill, who is changing character here, and to whom? The leading man in the film which signified Jack Torrance's change was male, played by Rock Hudson. So as the subject in this film is female, does it signify a change in Wendy? It's during the discussion I just described that the repressed, timorous and conformist Eve White morphs into the vivacious, flirtatious extrovert Eve Black. But at the time the cigarette in Ullman's office disappears, Wendy is reading The Catcher in the Rye, and in the video I did on that book, I speculated whether the characteristics Wendy shared with Jane Gallagher might signal a more significant role for the latter. When Eve's third face finally makes an appearance, she is unsure what to call herself. She quickly resolves this by christening herself Jane. She doesn't know why she chose that name. We know better. Jane represents a pleasantly balanced contrast to Eve White and Eve Black, but she struggles to remember her past until another appointment with Dr. Luther, on the 17th of September 1953. While it was the Eve White personality who started the discussion, Dr. Luther asked to speak to Jane, who then recounted an incident from the previous weekend when Eve was visiting her daughter Bonnie, who was in care. She told the doctor about a ball game with Bonnie, during which the ball went under the house. The Eve Jane character went to retrieve it and was overwhelmed by the sudden recollection of a past incident. Her posture at this moment of enlightenment, with the ball at her fingertips, is highly reminiscent of Danny outside room 237. In a combined effort with the other faces, it is Jane who finally recollects a traumatic incident which happened to her when she was a little girl. As her dead grandmother lay in her coffin in the house awaiting burial, Eve's mother coerced her into kissing the corpse farewell, albeit out of tradition, not malice. Young Evie was hysterical. The recollection jolts her childhood memory, and she is able to recite an extract from Shakespeare and remember all her teachers. She even remembers the address she lived at on 5th Street, 237 5th Street. So does the kissing of the decomposing old woman in the bathroom of room 237 relate to the incident at the core of this film? Or was it, as I previously suggested, harking back to Nicholson's role in The Terror when he kissed the cursed woman? Or was it both? Was Kubrick pointing out intertextual commonalities he'd spotted in appropriate works, like the Goya etching and Frankenheimer's The Iceman Cometh? If so, he appeared to have done it again with the three faces of Eve. Eve's hand gesture as she first reveals Eve Black parallels Danny after seeing the twins' corpses in the Overlook Zone shock corridor. Both are highly reminiscent of a similar pose from Sam Fuller's shock corridor and its corollary in The Shining, which we saw in the last presentation. Which reminds me, I never explained the incident which prompted the initial visit to the psychiatrist. Unaware that it was the Eve Black personality which was dominating his wife, Eve's husband Ralph heard his daughter Bonnie yelling, whereupon he rushed in to find his wife molesting her. Flinging his wife to one side, it was revealed that she had been attempting to strangle Bonnie's neck with a cord to a Venetian blind. In the last video, when we spoke about Bunny Lake is Missing, we saw Anne Lake with contusions to her neck, and it hardly needs stating where else we see such an image. So to summarise the last two videos on the subject of psychiatric themes, subtly and cunningly embedded in The Shining, it would seem justifiable to take literally the initial contention that every scene really has been done. From the opening shots being an inversion of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, to the interview combining quotations from Lilith, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden and The Three Faces of Eve, and then other evident parallels with the Snake Pit, Bunny Lake is Missing and Shock Corridor, the underlying psychiatric theme is there. Again, combine this with the Jungian interpretation which concluded the video on psychology in The Shining, and perhaps the hazy idea of what is actually happening in the film begins to emerge. Together with the scenes and dialogue Kubrick appears to have borrowed from his actors' previous films and programmes, it suggests not only that he had an enormous mental repository for such imagery, but the intelligence and wit to be able to deploy it in such a playful way. Perhaps that's the reason why there's a games room. Of course, you may incline to the belief that everything I've cited is just a coincidence, synchronicity on steroids. You may be right, but I'd really love to know what a statistician would say about the chances of it. But to conclude this video, let's examine an interesting scene towards the end of The Three Faces of Eve. On being asked by Dr. Luther whether she thinks of death, Jane quotes a couple of lines from Shakespeare and Fletcher's Two Noble Kinsmen, in which Theseus, the hero who killed the Minotaur, plays a key role. She says, "Life's a city full of straying streets, and death's the marketplace where each one meets." Now, death is a theme which appears in each and every one of Kubrick's films, so it was evidently a subject he thought about. Jane's response, invoking the slayer of the Minotaur, is very apt when we consider it in the context of The Shining with its maze motif. So maybe we should next examine some of those straying streets. So thank you very much for viewing this presentation. I hope you enjoyed the content, even if the production values left something to be desired. I'm afraid I'm not very gifted in that area. Also, please bear in mind that this is just one small facet of the puzzle that is The Shining. If you'd like to see more such presentations, please remember to like, subscribe and share the link. You may also be interested in the book from which the content of these videos is extracted. It's called The Games Room, a novel interpretation of Stanley Kubrick's film The Shining, and is available as a Kindle download from Amazon.